Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. Today joining me is Tero from Four Sigmatic. Tero is an interesting character. He grew up on a farm in Finland, foraging mushrooms and all sort of good stuff. And it's a very different perspective from a lot of people that I typically have on the show. So he has tried to bring the wisdom and health of mushrooms to the United States. So you might know of his company, Four Sigmatic, these little packets that have tubs and all this other stuff of mushrooms and other adaptogens. And so this is what we talk about through the show. Why people are sort of missing out on mushrooms in general. What is an adaptogen, how you can use it. And yeah, Tero is just a super interesting guy, very different perspective from a lot of other people. And I think you will enjoy this episode. Before we get started on the show today, I just wanted to take a minute to do some housekeeping items and keep you guys updated on some of the changes moving forward in the podcast. So we have done, over 80 episodes now. It's been about 2 years since we started the podcast, and the response has been pretty incredible. Blew my mind that when we launched, we hit number 1 in the health category in iTunes, have been there a couple times since, over 4 million downloads. It's just wild. So thank you so much for your support and listening, sharing with your friends, everything. It means the world to me, even if you are listening for the first time today, or if you have been sort of a loyal listener since episode 1. Seriously means a lot. And I don't take lightly my ability to have the audience that I have, whether it's from this podcast to my social media accounts, to my weekly newsletter, the feed where I just talk about random stuff that is on my mind with health. And I have never taken any sort of sponsorship or affiliate fee for anything to promote any certain product. So I've never been paid to promote anything. But what happens is as a podcast grows, the obligations get higher, the production cost goes up, and we're at a point where completely transparent, it actually costs quite a lot of money to produce a podcast. So there's a lot of hosting fees to write the show notes, to the time it takes to prepare, getting the guests scheduled, having the right equipment, etc. It all adds up. And we've done this all out of pocket, and we don't have any sort of income. And to make the show what we want it to be moving forward, we need to change that to a more sustainable model. So we have surveyed the people who have listened to this show before, my social media, my email list, etc., and have figured out that there's basically 2 models we can run a podcast on. One, we can lock some of the stuff up and make it a pay-for model like some other people have done. And there is also a sponsorship model. So there's ad reads and you guys can get filled in on some of the companies that I like. There was an overwhelming response of people who just wanted to have sponsors and not pay for any exclusive content. And I totally get it both ways, and there's nothing wrong with either model. I just have been super strict about what I promote personally for a really long time. So there will be sponsors on the show moving forward. All of that revenue from sponsorship, it will go to my team into the podcast production. It is not going to go towards me personally buying ribeyes or anything like that. And I just wanted to let you guys know that all sponsors that are going to be joining on and supporting the show will be the products that I have used for years already, or ones that I've very highly vetted to make sure that they meet our standards and quality. And it's not going to be stuff that are just random things that I've never used before. I have a very, very high quality bar, and nothing will get past that in lieu of just financing for the show. So I want to be very transparent about this stuff. If you have any questions, just reach out to me personally. Just send me a DM on Instagram. It's where I answer a lot of stuff. And thank you again so much for supporting the show. It means the world that I can call this a job and be able to do all of this stuff that I do and be able to help so many people that we've helped so far. So thanks again for all of your support. This episode of The Natural State is sponsored by Ned. Ned is an incredible company that makes a lot of CBD products, and you guys can probably go back to some of my episodes and realize that I have been a CBD skeptic for a very long time. I think that it's really hard in this industry that's exploding to have really high quality products that actually do anything. I tried a bunch of different CBD brands before this one, and unless they had THC in them as well, not enough to get high, but just enough to amplify the effects of CBD, I didn't feel anything until I tried Ned and then was completely blown away. I'd been using their products before they sponsored the show for about 4 to 6 months and have noticed a huge increase the nights that I use their product, about 25 milligrams, so 50 milligrams per night of the CBD. And I sleep way better. But then also the most interesting part is my HRV, as tracked by my Oura Ring, the next morning is about 20 points higher the day that I use CBD versus not. I also have not been doing a lot of social drinking as of this year. So anybody who's been following my stuff knows that I've sort of been taking the backseat to any sort of glass of wine here, drink there, to take the edge off. And the last few months, I'm sure everybody in the world feels a little stressed out. And I've been doing the same amount, like 25 to 50 milligrams, to sort of replace that glass of wine, to wind down and de-stress. And it's been pretty remarkable to pull down the edge and make sure that I can just calm down at night with all that's going on in the world. The founders are amazing people. They really care about their supply chain, their sourcing. They do things the right way. And I asked them to hook you guys up with a little bit of a discount code. So if you want to try Ned out, just go to helloned.com/AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. That's HELLONED.com/AG15. That's AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. This show is also brought to you by Alitura Naturals. When I considered sponsors for this show, I reached out to Andy, who is the founder of Alitura, and pretty much begged him to support the show just because they are the only products that I trust to put on my skin. So much garbage is in skincare products that it blows my mind. I cannot find any other products. I do not put anything else on my body other than Alitura. It's actually a lie. I use White Oak Pasture's beef tallow soap in the shower, but other than that, everything sort of pre-post or around that is Alitura. And if you don't know why, your skin is the largest organ in your body. It absorbs everything you put on it. And men are less known for using sort of skincare products, but women average over 250 chemicals that are in their bloodstream from their skincare products by the time they walk out the door in the morning. That is ridiculous. I personally use the moisturizer, the clay mask in my sauna, and the Pearl cleanser. My fiance uses way more. She has a little bit more of a skincare routine than I. And the products themselves are made with the highest end ingredients that you would ever find in skincare products. This stuff's incredible. Andy himself is a testament how these products work. He's been on the podcast before to tell his story, but it was amazing. He was in a horrific accident. His face got all mangled up, and he basically made this formula to heal his scars, and he is now a male model. That is not a joke. He has incredible skin and is obsessed with the quality of his ingredients and the sourcing of them. He was just in Hawaii recently sourcing one ingredient of the many that are in one of his products. This guy goes, visits every single farm and product, and it is incredible. The quality you get here is by far the best in the industry. And so I begged him to sponsor the show and also begged him to give you guys a little bit of a hookup. So if you use code AG20, you'll get 20% off and free shipping over at alitura.com. That's AG20 at ALITURA to get 20% off your order at alitura.com. That's AG20 at ALITURA.com. You'll get 20% off and free shipping of your entire order. Again, I use the Pearl Cleanser and the moisturizer. They are phenomenal. Tero, thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
So we were chatting a little bit before we started recording. You are a 13th generation farmer.
Yes. Yes.
Rare breed.
Yeah. It's sexy now. I feel like it's been not sexy for 12 and a half generations. You're the worst kind in the society. Yeah. So the lowest on the totem pole, lowest in the food chain. Yeah, but I guess now it's trendy to be mundane.
Right. So it's been the same farm? Or
yeah, it's been the same farm. And it might be more than 13 generations. Finland has only been, I grew up in Finland where the farm is. And we've been independent a little over 100 years. And so for over 600 years, we're part of Sweden, 100 years part of Russia. So we only know until 1619. But over those times, there's been multiple wars and civil wars. So a lot of things have changed over the years, obviously. But even in my lifetime, when I was a kid, our farm was big. and whatever, 800 acres. And now it's small. It's funny.
How small?
No, the same size, but comparably. Sorry. So like what farm size was big when I was a child is different now. So farms are getting bigger and bigger, more and more monocrops, more and more, less people, more machinery, bigger capex. So you just have to invest a lot in certain farm machines that are really, really expensive. Buy seeds with debt from large, companies like Monsanto and whatever. And it was just not probably the world our farm and family wants to be in.
Yeah. So I've been digging into this a little bit more in the last, year or so regarding the food system in the U.S. I don't know how many generations it goes back, but as far as my mom can go with genealogy, my family were farmers as well until my parents, essentially. So my parents both grew up on farms, and then their parents grew up on farms in central Minnesota. And then their parents came from Russia, who were immigrated from Germany, but that whole area had been farmers for as long as possible. And I saw my grandparents, both of them basically switched to having to go through this whole monocrop subsidy-based system. Did that same thing happen in Finland, or?
Yeah,
everywhere after?
It happened everywhere depending on the industry. So particularly like with us, it was around dairy farming, and we really didn't have dairy for the last few generations. We had dairy when the dairy was for the family and not for the sale. But yeah, when Europe joined European Union, when Finland joined European Union in mid-90s, then it really shifted because goods could get transported from Poland. Like really cheap food would come from Poland, and there was a free exchange of goods and labor. So European Union really shifted it. And right now, I believe 94% of farms in Finland lose money without subsidies.
Wow. And that's just the shift of the food production?
Yeah, and that's just the reality, and just basically makes no sense.
What type of, so what things were grown on your farm or still are?
Well, yeah, over the generations, there's many things, but at the end, it was like oats, berries, and mushrooms. That was some wheat, but yeah, most of this. Oat milk is now a big thing. Yeah. Oatly is Swedish, so oats are a big thing in our society. But yeah, oats, mushrooms, berries, those are kind of the main thing. But now it's been more like tourism. We have cabins by a lake that we rent out to get money, and then forest, selling timber, and for either like for energy production or for actual like making anything basically. Yeah.
Is there like a big farmers market scene in Finland? Like,
no, and that's problematic in Europe. European communities are smaller, so in many ways there is more of local food, but there's no farmers markets. Distances are big. There's huge distances, very little people, so it's harder to create a farmers market. I think more like kind of some sort of co-ops and direct farm buying is more likely to happen in certain things like eggs. But yeah, there isn't really a farmers market, only in the capital and maybe the second biggest town, but there really isn't a farmers market.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've seen. It's a lot of smaller farms do to make their money now, is just to sell locally to farmers markets, and several of them in certain cities. So growing up, you were living on the farm. What size of a city were you in?
No, it's a village of a couple hundred people. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a small, really, really small place outside of a town called Nokia, which is famous for mobile phones. But that would be like a medium-sized town in a city in our country. And I think it has something like 20, 30,000 people. Yeah. And that's like a city. And then there's villages around it. Yeah.
So, I mean, now you're sort of the face of mushrooms in the United States, at least. And
yeah, I don't know about that.
How did you, I mean, when you were younger, how did you make the transition to the States? And like what, I'm assuming that a lot of people probably stay at these small villages and towns.
Yeah. So I guess there's two parts to that question. So within Finland, a lot of people end up leaving, at least temporary. We have a mandatory military service, so end up leaving for the military, and then college is free for everyone, and you can't even, there's no really private school, so you can't buy yourself into a school. You have to go through an entrance exam, and a lot of people end up moving to the few big cities to go to school, and a lot of people stay on those trips. So that's how That's just common until they have kids maybe, and then they move back. So almost everyone leaves the small villages to go to military and college, and most people get a master's degree actually, because actually you get money to go to school. Basically you get a subsidy to go to school, plus school is free. So a lot of people end up doing it.
Very different system.
Yeah. And so that was it. And I moved out when I was 18, and then went to the military, and then I've lived in 10 countries. So I guess as soon as I could fiscally and legally, I kind of left the country. I wanted to see the world. I knew there was so much else to see. Finland is an amazing place. So many things are good, but then it's also a little bit of a little bird's nest, you know. Mm-hmm. It's like I wanted to see the world and experience different things. So
how did you end up here?
I ended up here purely to help people. I was not one of those people who dreamed about living in California or New York or whatever, which is the thing. A lot of people in Europe do dream about the Cali lifestyle, I guess, or something, but I never planned to move here. It was more around that I felt that the US was the most important market to shift consumer mindset and consciousness around anything. And I also felt that this was the place that needed the most. And finally, personally, this is the place where this is where the community is. This is like the ground zero of wellness, health and wellness. So, so that was why I moved here, purely for professional reasons. And obviously it's been a great time here, but that's what made the move.
So living around 10 plus places, have you noticed that sort of American mindset and consciousness around food, health, wellness, et cetera, permeates all the other countries?
Yeah, both in good and bad. So, there was a point when, for example, China was on the rise and people were like, oh, you know, the Chinese own the US, and there's this sentiment that the US has lost its power. And I never bought into that just because of the cultural importance. Like you can I went to Morocco maybe like 10 years ago, and I went to like a souk, kind of like an area with marketplace, bazaar type of place. And there's a little kid comes with a tricycle with a 50-cent t-shirt on, and they speak mostly Arabic, but a little bit of French, or some speak Spanish. And he said basically like, die mofo, with the full sentence. And threw like gun signs at me and my friend who I was with. And we started talking to him in French and then Spanish, and he didn't speak English, Spanish, or French, but he knew a lyric from some rap song.
That's what it was.
And it was like, wow, that's crazy. Like this person wants to be a rapper in America, even though he doesn't even speak English, right? That's crazy. But then on the health side, on the positive side, I definitely, if you go to Canada, go to UK, Australia, they are always like 1 year behind the US or so, like in consumer trends. And that just, there's more people here, there's more crazy people willing to try stuff, and then they find out something that actually works and produces, and then people join.
Yeah. So you chose mushrooms or superfoods, like you said before we were chatting. And is this something that you intentionally thought, hey, we need to change public perception about this, and it's going to be really impactful because of X, Y, or Z reasons? Or how did you think about?
Yeah, exactly. So I had domain expertise. I grew up learning through my family about mushrooms and foraging, and it's a whole story. But about 15 years ago, even won an innovation contest for discovering a rare mushroom. But I didn't imagine myself as a mushroom entrepreneur. Like why Four Sigmatic had a mushroom focus was more around my passion to help people in health and wellness. And I thought, is like, what's the next wave of health? And what interested me was not just optimizing for, is it organic or not? Like granola, organic or not, did not excite me, you know? Or optimizing for macros, which was the world I studied nutrition and chemistry, and that was the world I grew up in. Is like nutrition was like, hey, what's the ratio of amino acids or proteins to carbohydrates and stuff like that? And that didn't excite me either. It works, but I knew there was more. There was like, we have an operating system in our body, and that was always what fascinated me more. So immune function, nervous system, brain function, gut health, hormonal balance. Those are like 5 things that excited me way more than excited me of like, hey, like, you know, how much fats I take in a day.
Right.
And obviously everything impacts everything. But then looking at like, hey, what are the best ways to support immunity? What's the best ways to support gut health? What's the best ways to support nervous system? And my view was like natural is better than synthetic eventually. Synthetic can be more powerful in the short term, but long-term natural will always beat synthetic. That was my thesis. That could be right or wrong. So I thought, like, what are the natural ways how I can impact? And that came the idea of Four Sigmatic. So Four Sigmatic just means that, like, the top 100 most researched foods in the world. It's just math, kind of geeky way of, but every standard deviation from a mean is called a sigma. And if you take all the world's foods and you look at their nutrient density, you'll form a bell curve or a normal distribution of their nutrient density. And if you go 4 sigmas, that would be like the top 100 foods. And that excited me, is like, what are the top 100 most researched whole foods in the world? And because those foods are not just the most researched foods, they usually also have a huge cultural history, like green tea. Like, green tea is arguably the most studied health substance. And coconut, hemp, cinnamon, cardamom, lemon. But then there's also more rare things like reishi mushroom, eleuthero, rhodiola, people that people don't know about. And big part of those were mushrooms, and people didn't know much about them. So when nobody else was really talking about them, and I knew so much about them, so it was kind of like it happened. My personal passion met the consumer need, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, did you guys do a lot of education when you first started?
Oh yeah, tons. Because we didn't have venture funding or money. So there's really like 4 ways how you can make a dent in the conventional world. I guess now this whole online podcast, social media has changed it. But back in the day, it was education, product demos, product innovation, and then it was like promotions, paid promotions that you could do. And we couldn't afford the paid promotions, and we could only do so much innovation because we didn't have cash. So it was really came down to is like us sampling the products to as many people as we could and doing education around it. So pretty much first 4 years, everything we did was around education and trying to get the product in the hands of people so they could try it.
Yeah. I mean, what was that first like when you're educating people about? They probably say, oh, I get mushrooms on my pizza. How is this any different? When you guys were sort of experimenting and going out with these, cordyceps, reishi, chaga, et cetera. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a radical idea. When I got to the U.S. and I was like, I want every American to drink mushrooms. That's obviously, you got a little shits and giggles,
Yeah, and, drink? What do you mean?
Yeah. And it's, some people get really excited. They get excited about because of psychedelic reasons or whatever it may be, or they get really scared because they don't like the flavor or they think it's poisonous. But that's also an opportunity when you do something that seems odd or radical. It requires more education and hand-holding, but it's also a way to have a meaningful conversation versus just selling popcorn with less fat,
Right.
So it's a blessing and a curse. It takes longer, but you can actually build something of more meaning, and especially if you're the real deal and not trying to do or just say something that's not, you can't back it up.
Yeah. And so some of those first conversations you guys had with people who had no idea, I mean, it's a little more commonplace now to have some of these mushrooms. I mean, how would you educate somebody who
it's
has
still
no
surprisingly idea? Like, we still get those reactions. I mean, in certain areas people are more in tune now, but yeah, we still get those reactions. But yeah, the common reactions is like, is this psychedelic, either positively or negatively? And that could go either way, usually negatively. Does this taste like mushrooms, or I don't like the taste of mushrooms, or I'm freaked out of mushrooms, or then it's like, what are the health benefits? People don't know why. What is the kingdom of fungi, and how does that involve in physiology and anatomy? So
yeah, I mean, people think a lot that mushrooms are just a vegetable, like something else.
Correct.
Very different.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely different. It's differently in biology, but it's also different in physiology. So, yeah, from a biology point of view, they're their separate kingdom, same way as plants and animals are a different kingdom. Bacteria and fungi are different kingdoms. And yeah, it's just actually, and from a DNA similarity, Animalia is a much closer kingdom to fungi than Plantae or the plants. So mushrooms are way closer to us. We're like almost up to 50% same DNA as mushrooms and humans versus plants, very different. Like mushrooms breathe oxygen and expel CO2 versus plants are the reverse. Mushrooms need to eat something to produce energy versus plants can use photosynthesis. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're very different than just vegetables on pizza.
Yeah. So, I mean, the common stuff like vegetables on pizza or the mushrooms on pizza that people generally eat, how is this stuff different as far as like the products that you guys have or maybe the lesser known?
Yeah. It's like when something is a kingdom, you can think of like, hey, will you have a pet rabbit or a dog versus having a pet alligator or rhino, or something like that.
Spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, or in plants is like, hey, you got people are like, oh, plant-based diet will heal you. Yeah, it could, but it could also kill you. I grew up foraging, so I know a lot of plants that will kill me if I eat them. So same is true for mushrooms. And right now, to our best knowledge, there's 6 times more mushroom varieties than there are plant varieties. So for every Brussels sprout or tomato, there's 6 different kinds of mushrooms somewhere out there. So the biodiversity of mushrooms is significantly higher than what most people think when they know 1 or 2 varieties at the grocery store. And that means that there's something good, there's something bad. So it's not black and white, like some mushroom is good, some of them might be bad. Actually, we have a thing called mycobiome, myco referring mushrooms and biome. So wherever you'll find mushrooms, you'll find bacteria. Wherever you'll find bacteria, you'll pretty much find mushrooms. So on our skin and our gut is filled with fungi. They live very symbiotically with bacteria. And there's just like a whole array of good bacteria and bad bacteria. There's also good fungi, bad fungi. But the main difference for the mushrooms we use is that these are functional mushrooms versus culinary mushrooms. So they have higher nutrient density in many ways, but they grow on trees and you can't eat them raw. So you have to prepare them. You have to extract them like bone broth. It's almost like they're sturdy like wood and you have to brew them. And then you drink the brew, and that brew is very powerful.
Got it. So I was going to ask also something I've been interested in is, there's these grow kits that you can get at a farmer's market that have, lion's mane, et cetera, on that. And then some of these you can just eat, but like, where is it the most effective? Is it effective, like you said, if you do a brew like this, do you have to cook them? There's just depend per?
Yeah, that's funny. I think in nutrition or health and wellness, the faster we get to the full funnel or for full supply chain, then the faster we'll understand if something is good or bad. So often we think of like, hey, lion's mane good, portobello bad, but like how is the lion's mane grown and how is it stored? How is it processed? And this is true for every food from coffee to whatever, like you can go down the list. So it matters like what variety of mushroom we're talking about, how was it grown, how was it harvested, when was it harvested, how was it dried. For example, if you sun dry the mushroom, it like can grow the vitamin D amounts by 9 times. So mushrooms have very similar skin as we, and we can absorb vitamin D through their skin, quote unquote skin, into them. And then if you sun dry them, you have tons. It's like a plant-based vitamin D supplement almost. So all of this matters, but what definitely matters with all of them, however you get your functional mushrooms like lion's mane, chaga, reishi, is that you cannot eat them raw. Our body cannot digest them. So you have to apply some sort of extraction method to them. The 2 most common ways to extract is heat and lipids, or heat and alcohol. Heat, particularly like, or for example, hot water, cooking them in hot water like you would do bone broth, extracts the more immune supporting and gut supporting functions. And then the lipids or the alcohol will extract the non-water soluble compounds that are more kind of adaptogenic. The main point being is that there's multiple different types of compounds in these mushrooms that you can get out, but intuitively a chef who makes, or indigenous people who cooked a broth or a soup with fats would have extracted all they needed. So when a chef sautés mushrooms in a pan with butter, they're actually unlocking also the nutritional effects, not just the flavor.
And then I'm sure that a lot of these are marketed as, chagas or cordyceps are these ones that sort of give you energy, and reishi sort of calms you down. But the actions, I'm sure, are very non-specific, meaning that they can affect many, many different things. Yeah,
that was actually a challenge for Four Sigmatic was when people ask us in the first 2 years, when should I take these? My reply was always, whenever. and it was very confusing, especially for Americans. If a product, you can take it in the morning and evening, people are like, I don't get it. It's like you had to be an upper or downer. So, but it's true. By definition, all the adaptogens are non-specific, and they impact multiple body functions, and they restore balance. And when something is restoring balance or being a modulator, so they modulate a certain body response, such as immune response or stress response, it's two directional, and you could have it in the morning and evening. But generally speaking, if you look at their unique benefits, like cordyceps has cordycepin, cordycepic acid, those are improving ATP production, VO2 max, so energy production. So it does make sense that you would probably use them when you want better energy production. And then reishi, that has things like triterpenes, the terpene family known from hemp is obviously a more calming, or chondrodermic acid. Those are more, impacting the HPA axis and our kind of stress response. So there might be time when you're really stressed out or you want to relax.
Yeah. I think that adaptogen is sort of this new word for superfood that everyone's throwing around.
Yeah. And it's that started with Dr. Lazarov. It's the mushrooms and herbs themselves have been used for thousands of years, but Lazarov started studying it for the Soviet army only in like the 60s.
What is the difference between mushroom and adaptogen?
Doesn't have to be. Adaptogen can be in any plant, fungi, or animal product that fits into three main criteria. One, that it's non-toxic and habit-forming, so it's safe to consume daily. That already takes a lot of the herbs out that should be used seasonally. Second is it needs to be non-specific, to your point that what you mentioned is that it impacts multiple body functions, and it needs to restore balance in the body. And a lot of people use any superfood, calls it an adaptogen, when in reality there's maybe 15 or 20 things that would apply as an adaptogen. If you really stretch it, maybe you get to 25, but there surely isn't hundreds of them. And surely, are
there any animal-based ones?
Yeah, there's... It gets debatable, partly because the more vegan plant-based community has been in the forefront of adaptogen movement. But you would probably and again, these are more controversial, but like deer antler and things like that would be pretty close. Oddly, ants probably, but this is a more complicated topic. It might take an hour to unwind, because at the end of the day, adaptogens are whole foods. So things like omega-3 fatty acids wouldn't classify, because they're basically a nutrient versus a food. So you would have to look at is a certain specific animal adaptogenic or not versus a part of the animal.
Okay. So it's not like an adaptogen is an extract from some food or something like that?
No, it would be a class of usually herbs and mushrooms that classify into those three groups.
Yeah. I mean, and we see this too, like you were saying before, the variety of plants all over the place, variety of animal products all over the place, and you generally are way healthier when you eat. You look at an animal product, it's, make bone broth, you have the muscle meat, have the organ meats, etc. Plants across the plant spectrum. There's the same thing with mushrooms in general, since there's so much biodiversity. Like, have you guys, when you're formulating products, do you think, oh, this one and this one and this one work really, really well together?
Yeah. So I guess there's two parts of that question. So one, is variety good? Absolutely, yes. That's one of the things in nutrition we focus a lot on. Things we disagree with is, should you be on a carnivore diet or should you be in a plant-based diet? These are usually extremes, right? Mm-hmm. But versus, there's actually a lot of things we agree on. There's probably like 90% of stuff we agree on. We just really focus on the 10% that we don't. And variety, although if you're really sick, there might be a purpose for a really simple monomeal type of thing. Generally speaking, for intelligence in body and nutrients, diversity matters. Even if you take dark leafy greens, you probably don't want to always eat spinach. You actually might get pretty sick. So it's important to have different types of dark leafy greens, or different forms of chlorophyll, just this one type of chlorophyll, because there are different micronutrients. Even when you, by the way, same with plants, is like when you eat berries have high sugar, but they also have tons of great polyphenols that are great for longevity, right? So should you have berries, wild berries versus not? I would say absolutely yes, but eat the leaf, chew the leaf. And it was like the same leaf is often balancing, for example, the sugars in your teeth and protecting your body with many other things. So chewing the leaf of the berry probably helps you also, have better outcomes. So same as with mushrooms. So you should have more than one mushroom variety. All of them have these polysaccharides, but having different types of polysaccharides is good for immunity. But not all mushrooms are created equal, same way as not all meat products are created equal. So you could have, corn-fed beef from a mass production farm, or you should have whatever, Bel Campo grass-fed beef, and there's a big difference, right? So the same with mushrooms. Not all mushrooms are great for you, but having diversity in a kingdom is probably a smart choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy, I think, in plants and animal products to understand the supply chain. But when somebody's selling something online, or as these things become more popular, thanks to what you guys are doing, how does somebody know that whole supply chain?
Well, the short answer is they don't.
Yeah.
Even probably both of us being in this industry and basically spending all our time on it, and we're more educated on all the stuff. Like even for us, we go to a grocery store, it's hard to know. It's like, where does this actually come from, right? So the answer is probably you don't, unless you buy it from farmers markets only. Pretty hard in commercial packaged foods. So you have to kind of choose what are the things you want to research and then go deep on those. And then like, okay, I am going to buy a fish oil. I'm going to research the fish oils, right? And then you find a product you like, right? But it is hard. And I see it when, growing up with mushrooms in this industry my whole life, I always like hated the hype, and indirectly by mushrooms becoming so trendy right now, I have created partly or helped to expand a category. And now there's all these up and coming brands that have no clue. Like I've met some of them, they don't even know where their own mushrooms are coming from. They just say, oh, we buy from this company. And I'm like, do you know where that company gets it from? No, great. Awesome. So there was a study that I believe in the US out of the reishi supplements, 75% of the reishi supplements on the market were not actually reishi. Great.
So there's old portobellos chopped up and...
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Love it. So yeah, but as a consumer, it is pretty hard. You kind of have to go category by category, and it's not, if you have the time, longer time period, it's not that hard, but in the beginning, it's pretty hard. You just need to go deep on specific things at a time. So I would focus on the habits you do the most, or what do you consume the most? So for example, vegetables or meat are those kind of staple foods is a great place to start. Spices, things like that. But then if you have a morning smoothie or morning coffee or, whatever it may be, starting there maybe, and like upgrading those or checking out the sourcing and the quality of those items that you consume the most. And then if you happen to consume a product here and there that is not the best, then it's probably have a lesser impact on the total system.
Do you guys do your own production in farming, or do you have that spread all over the place? Where is it based from?
Yeah, we quite early on had to decide is like, do we raise $100 million to build a supply chain, or do we use contract manufacturers? And we ended up a little bit of a hybrid solution. So we use contract manufacturers, and that's like an industry term for people who pack and produce your product based on your specifics. So they have the factory, they have the machinery. So we own none of our own packaging facilities, for example. We buy packaging materials, and there's a company that packs it for us for a certain fee, right? And we just felt that there was so many other headaches and challenges and opportunities with education and innovation that we felt that if we would spend all our days focusing on, that some employee didn't come for work at this factory all day long, it's away from innovation and education.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but you're talking earlier about sort of influencing consumer trends as much as one would love to just be able to launch something and have everybody gravitate towards it, because what you think or what I think is great. I mean, we're the same thing. So we use a contract manufacturer for all of our products as well, but we do that specifically to stay lean and stay nimble. So that way we can say, okay, we have this thesis that people should either eating this bar and they should be eating the bar that we made. And we launch it, but you have to work so much with consumers to figure out where they're at, what they're ready for.
Your bars are great, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the tastiest bars on the market.
Well, that's important, but that's the thing with if you own your own manufacturing stuff, it's like a bar line can come in very different shapes and forms.
Yes.
And so if you do it, you sort of beholden to the equipment you've invested into.
Yes.
And it's much harder to innovate and change and meet the consumer where they're at. And
you can also think of it like you have limited bandwidth and you have limited capability of making change as a small team, like with you, like with us, just start with 3-4 people in someone's living room trying to figure it out, right? And then you slowly grow, but you can only do so much. So do you want to spend that time on manufacturing machines and then be in the mercy of investors who are willing to give you X many millions of capital investment to build your own facility? And is that the right way to go? And then you have to get state or country subsidies to build this factory. So you get a tax cut in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to build a facility, which is awesome because you employ people, but it's also a whole different world. Yeah. And then that's away from innovation and education. And that's how we felt. We just felt that innovation and education should be at the core of what we do, and if we spend time on that. But then, unlike most brands, we took a really strong hold on the sourcing side. So a lot of people allow the co-packers or some sort of ingredient sellers to control that. And we chose that all our main ingredients will directly work with the co-ops or the farmers to get the ingredients we need. And we only use ingredient sellers for items that we use very minimal, sea salt, where it's it's not business critical. We'll send it to a lab, we'll see that it is what it is, but it's the difference between us sourcing the sea salt and someone else sourcing the sea salt when we use it, not that many kilos a year is not critical. Yeah,
it's a tricky thing that you said before, that a lot of people look at these products and they say, oh yeah, this brand looks good, the packaging looks nice, it must be sourced well. But then you talk to the founders. I mean, going to the show this week, that's just a bunch of packaged food companies, and many of them have no idea. Zero idea.
Lily, you ask the founder and they don't even know which company sells it to them, let alone where does that company buy it from. And it's so ridiculous. Lily, the one thing you do is you create food. You don't know where that food is from. And I used to say this, it's not true, but it gives an indication, is that marketing is a tax you pay for a bad product. And that's not as black and white as that, but it's I just keep that in mind. It's at the end of the day, we are trying to serve people with nutritious, beautiful things, and marketing can help, education can help, good messaging and websites can help, but at the end of the day, if you sell crap, what are you doing? Or maybe you sell good stuff, but you don't know where it's coming from. And it is so obvious when you ask the people and no clue.
Yeah. I mean, and it's tough too to be in this space. My mission as well is just to help as many people as possible through these foods. And to see so many people who have sort of mastered the game of selling packaged food to people, and they know exactly oh, if we name it this thing and put it on this shelf at this price, it's going to sell. And they do it purely for money. It's pretty frustrating, but certainly leaves the door open for people like you and us to come and actually provide honest ingredients and honest products.
Yeah, I look at it as anybody who might be listening, if you have a passion, be that playing the violin, playing basketball, I don't know, whatever, when it becomes a profession, things change, right? So when you're an avid consumer or a fan of these things, it's very different than when you go behind the scenes and see what's actually happening at these facilities. I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up on a farm, so I would have those harsh realities pretty early on. But yeah, it's just a whole heck of a lot different, and there's a lot of people who take advantage of that, and that sucks. But then it's you have to come to a decision if you want to work in something you're passionate about. But you can get really jaded really easily. And I've gone through like 2-3 waves of that where I'm like, I'm not sure, should I do this? Because I know all this stuff is happening in an industry that just makes me bummed out.
I mean, what were those points for you?
I think the very first, when we were starting Four Sigmatic, and I had to source these adaptogens that would not grow in Finland, and I would go deep in the supply chain, and then I would go to the first shows and I would realize what we just discussed.
Yeah.
And I was like, you have no clue. And I would find all these things, like people sold berry powders. And they would say, these are acai berries. And then you look at the COAs, it's 70% maltodextrin. Or like coconut water powder or whatever. And it's like, you're really selling maltodextrin made out of GMO corn. That's what over half of your product is. Same with mushrooms. There's a bunch of, most of the leading products were not even the mushroom, the fruiting body, but it was the mycelium. And it was like 50 to 70% of the product was brown rice or oats. And that was really like eye-opening. And they were huge companies, and they were well-respected companies, were well-respected companies. And that was the first one. It's like, do I really want to do this? In a way, it's exciting because you can tell something. But I also didn't join this industry to fight with other brands who are like, my enemy was more like Mickey D's and Monsanto. And I didn't want to fight with another like small to medium-sized company at a food expo of the fact that they don't disclose to their consumers that they're selling simple sugars isolated from corn. Right. I mean, it's true, but that doesn't make me happy, because like, I think they're trying to help. They just don't know, I think, versus the larger corporations that I think pretty consciously mess up things, and they have a bigger net impact.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, just like at scale, it's really challenging to get that same acai berry without loading it in this like heavily industrialized way.
Yeah, and some things are not meant to be shipped that way. It's just not. It's not something just needs to be done.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, a lot of these substances that are good for you are pretty sturdy and clean by themselves. Like, a lot of them are even considered weeds. Like, there are foods that just grow no matter what. The nettles and the dandelions, and I guess hemp to a certain extent, like they just survive. Coconut, you go to the right climate, those guys, they live really easily. They just survive, So a lot of the best foods in the world are actually survivors. So there is a benefit to that. It's just when you go to weaker foods and weaker animals, and that's when the food quality actually also goes down, but it's like also harder to maintain them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like you said, that we just need to focus on fighting the right fight. And I think that knowing where your food comes from and eating real food is sort of the big thing, that I think it's hard for anybody to disagree with that. Yet we have people arguing on the margins of eating vegan or carnivore or whatever. It's challenging. Being as you do products that are neither plant or animal, how do you think about this whole carnivore vegan debate and carnivore nutrition in general right now?
I think it's just not seeing the forest from the trees. Not to say that that's not a conversation we should have, not at all. You should have that conversation. To me, it's just like, I've observed it in different words for over a decade, close to 20 years of my life. So I just think that if you think of the 80-20 good old Pareto rule on like what gives people health, we have these two kingdoms that we ignore, bacteria and fungi, that have a much bigger impact that nobody really focuses on. And also understanding the quality of how do you execute that carnivore or plant or vegan diet is a big factor. You can be a really unhealthy vegan or pretty healthy vegan. You can probably be also pretty unhealthy carnivore and healthy carnivore. So there's big differences in both strategies. So yeah, I think it's a fine conversation to have, but I think there's many other things that we ignore. And my whole thing is that health or nutrition is just the blue belt in the jiu-jitsu of life. And there's other things like breath. even water. I feel like we can go 3 weeks without eating, but we can pretty much go 3 days without water. So what kind of water are you consuming? Right. I mean, that's pretty massive. And then finally, your mind, what kind of stories are you telling yourself? You all know that like surfer or some dude who eats pizza and just drinks beer and doesn't eat healthy, but is like vibrating because they're having fun every day and they're outdoors and enjoying. And then there's that like person who's like hyper aware of what they eat, but they're pale and unhealthy and panicking, stressed out about everything. And you're like, well, I don't know, but I don't want that life.
Yeah. What's sort of interesting about you were saying earlier with the bacteria and the fungi versus carnivore and vegan. This is how I think about it, is like carnivore people are getting a lot of benefit because they're essentially removing all fiber from their diet. This is a gut protocol that when I used to practice that I would do with people is basically put them on a 0 fiber, 0 carb diet to help their gut out. And I think that, like you're saying, from the like fiber is essentially food for bacteria. So you either give it food or restricted food, but we're not talking about the bacteria and the fungus itself.
No, and it's like if you dry meat, it's going to have fungi in it in the form of yeast when you dry it, and there's a bunch of other things that happen with it. It's not like no matter how much you scrub your skin or restrict your body from you'll still have bacteria and fungi in your gut and your skin. It's going to be there. It's just like how healthy it is. But it is true that for most people, one of the first things they can do to improve their life is to improve their digestive health. That is for a lot of people, especially people who've lived a more conventional diet. And in order to do that, you might not do it with like a small shift. You might need something more radical, right? Because altering your gut biome might take a really long time, actually. And you might need to go on a specific protocol that either is quite strict to improve your gut biome. But once the gut biome settles and you're just mindful of anti-nutrients and what you put, like long term, I would say that probably not consuming fiber is not the smartest health strategy. But in the beginning, if you have gut health issues, that reset might be really valuable.
And so the way probiotics work, contrary to what most people think, is they don't go inside your body and populate your gut with more bacteria. And more so, while they're in transit, they outcompete a lot of bacteria. So given that fungi is sort of the same thing, do mushrooms play a role in this ecosystem?
Yeah,
like how 100%. Are they different from...
that's kind of what the studies are now. I've always known that that's the case because the most active compounds, most studied compounds in these mushrooms for health, these polysaccharides, and particularly these beta-glucans, we've known that they get absorbed in the digestive tract. And then from there, they modulate the natural killer cells and they modulate the hormonal balance, the glands. And so I've kind of always known that there was a connection there. All fermented foods, be it sauerkraut, miso soup, beer, wine, bread, all have a relationship where bacteria and fungi collaborate to create a fermented product. So to me, it's pretty obvious that it's always been the case, but now in the last few years, that research is more coming out. And there's tons of studies like mice, both on a high-fat, low-carb diet. One group gets reishi mushroom, the other group doesn't. The group that gets reishi mushroom has significantly higher fat burn and also energy levels, partly because what the researchers indicated was improved gut biome and digestion. So I think that's definitely the case. And like you said, is that it's not that you never not have bacteria, but they fight for the space, the good and the bad, unless you do a full-on antibiotics crazy. Right. But like it's always a battleground, and what you feed, who wins that battle. So the same with mushrooms. Candida is, for example, a great example of a bad type of a mushroom, a yeast infection, basically. So it really matters, are the good mushrooms winning or the bad mushrooms winning? And what's the balance between them?
Have there been studies with mushrooms, like consuming mushrooms and Candida?
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like normal mushrooms, like culinary mushrooms, like butter mushrooms increase Candida versus mushrooms like reishi that are more antiviral, antibacterial, actually help with that. So they're antifungal. So it's kind of hilarious, but that is the cosmic giggle of Mother Nature, is that fight fire with fire, but sometimes like what you need to destroy is you need to do that from a different thing. So there are mushrooms that hurt, but there's also mushrooms that heal other mushrooms. So that is kind of same as for bacteria. Is there's bacteria that heals the bad bacteria, and that's not that different with mushrooms.
Yeah, we're finding a lot with probiotics as well that the bacteria doesn't even need to be living. It's the same thing with mushrooms. So you said, for instance, like you have to take it out, make a tea, heat it up, etc. Is it helpful to have any mushrooms that are still living, or are they just compounds that come out, or how?
No, because they're extremophile, so mushrooms can live in extreme conditions from the Sahara Desert to Antarctica, actually even every level of the atmosphere, including outer space, and that's not a woo-woo thing, but mushrooms can survive in extreme conditions. Just to illustrate one example of that, if the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, mushrooms came the first thing to come from the sea to the dry land 2.4 billion years ago, and that's well over a billion years before plants arrived, and they had to eat something, so they ate rocks. So mushrooms can survive in extreme conditions. It's just that us humans lack this enzyme to break down chitin, which is the shell structure of these mushrooms. Chitin is the same structure that creates lobster shell or shrimp shell. So you'd have to cook it, but the live organisms don't really matter, or heated organisms don't matter the same way, because the mushroom is still alive in those extreme conditions.
Yeah.
And that's why it also survives the digestive process, and there's a bunch of other things around that. It's just for us human consumption, you want to somehow break down that cell structure.
So in a packet of your guys' stuff, there's still active living organism?
Yeah, but they're heated. So let's say the Australian government could classify something as sterile by something that's saying that it's like heated above a certain, so it depends on the classification, what is living. But there is living intelligence in that extracted product.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we were talking earlier about mindset and how a surfer can be great, other people not. And when talking about mushrooms, other than the ones you eat traditionally on pizza and stuff like that, people generally, like you said, think psychedelic either positively or negatively. Obviously, there's a lot of attention on this stuff coming out over the last few years, and we have a lot of studies come out. But, I mean, we have this kingdom, the separate kingdom that can be poisonous, can be sort of neutral, can be ultra healthy, but also can possess these certain compounds that, you know, I think that a lot of people have still no concept, and it's taboo. I think that consensus is changing a little bit, sort of in the fringe. But I'd be curious to know, like, if you have any recent information around, you know, either studies or where we're at with legalizing, you know, magic mushrooms, as people would know what the benefits are, et cetera.
Yeah, it's definitely opening up. I think that's a whole nother podcast we could do just on psychedelics. There tends to be two groups, like with anything else. The really psychedelic, pro-psychedelic group that thinks that it's going to be legalized any day now. Yeah. And I think that's probably pretty false. If you look at Denver and Oakland cases that have recently come out, they've not fully legalized, they're decriminalized them, and they moved that there can be no taxpayer money spent on catching somebody in Denver with a certain amount of psilocybin, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. DA could still come out and do it. It's federally also. The state of Colorado is not legal, and I think it's still quite a bit but the fact that people say that this is going to stay as a drug, or pretty ignoring the current research. So first of all, humans have been consuming these psychedelics for a long time. They're non-poisonous, so you can't overdose on them. They're non-habit forming. You cannot get addicted to them. And the studies are just overwhelmingly positive, and more studies need to be made. So
are they qualified as an adaptogen?
Yeah, that's where psychedelics become a very fascinating part. Is some of them could be habit forming and even toxic, like MDMA has a nervous and a toxic load to the nervous system. With the serotonin receptors with psilocybin, it's more like you just get accustomed to it. You build tolerance.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, what I've seen too, is like they maybe are using these substances originally as a means to have some sort of awareness shift or mental health breakthrough, and then they, get some takeaways, but then just keep going back to the well because they're trying to chase this peak state instead of just dealing with reality. I think that's a huge problem too.
Yeah, and that's why I've always been like more Switzerland around this topic than pro or con. I'm like huge believer, obviously, in the intelligence that mushrooms have, including psilocybin. And I've had over the years of couple decades of being with these, I've had positive personal experiences with them. And I'm an advisor to the world's first legal psilocybin center in Netherlands, Synthesis, and they do research with Imperial College, so Ruben Carhart Harris and Rosalind Watts and those guys, and they're, if not the best, second best psychedelic research center in the world. And the studies that they are pretty incredible. So I'm a huge believer in it, but I also know how powerful they are and how important it is to have the right set and setting and the work with it. So I kind of use this anecdote that I heard one day is that psychedelics are like an elevator that takes you to the top of Mount Everest to see the views. But then at the end of the journey, it will take you back, if not to the bottom, at least to the base camp. And you still need to do the work and climb up. It shows what's possible and it gives you answers, but there's a whole point of integration. So that set and setting in psychedelics is massive. And if you just do it at home yourself or recreationally, you're probably not reaping the benefits. And these are not substances you would need to take on a regular basis. These are substances you might take once or twice a year, or in some cases once or twice in your life. Like it might be that you might take these compounds once or twice in your life, not once or twice a month.
Yeah. I just, walking up here across the street, there's the MedMen. And I can just only imagine, I think that there's some people who are very pro psychedelic, psilocybin, et cetera, that think that there's going to be a MedMen equivalent to mushrooms soon in psilocybin. And I would just be curious to see how American culture would absorb that and assimilate that. I mean, this happens, I think Netherlands is one of the only places that this is available, but you go in there and sort of like same thing, you have sort of a menu of options to choose from when you go in.
And even there, I don't think those are good for you. I think unless you work with someone
just
to set intentions, have quote unquote flight instructions. It's like a driver's license. You're not just going to go and drive. It's not like, hey, here's a car keys, go drive here in the highway in Los Angeles or something like that. Yeah. No, don't. Do it with someone who will teach you how to drive the car first and then give you guidance on how to drive it on your own later. So, the same goes here. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. This is happening. This is not... I think there was 2 years ago, I still feared another of a Timothy Leary moment of that could have a really bad PR effect, could set back. I think we're way beyond that. I think even if there would be quote unquote a bad PR moment for psychedelics, they're coming. It's happening and there's no stopping it. Nobody can put it to a halt right now.
Do you just think that's because of sort of the
enough awareness and enough positive experiences and enough research now? So we've kind of hit that tipping point, but these don't happen overnight. And the fact that 2 municipalities or 3 municipalities, or I guess Santa Cruz now, but few towns decide to do something doesn't mean that the whole country or even the whole state will do it. And I think it will come in phases, same way as it took a moment from, medicinal marijuana to where it is today in California, let alone it's still not federally allowed. Yeah. So it's just going to take time, and that's just not necessarily a bad thing. It just needs patience, but it's happening faster than I thought, but not as fast as a lot of the biggest supporters think that it's going to happen overnight.
Yeah, and I think that too, what might happen, and maybe not, but like you said, there's all these research centers and maybe clinics start using them.
Oh, and that's already happening.
Be recreational.
Yeah, that's already happening with ketamine and other substances. I think right now there's research use. I think there will be then centers that are licensed with almost government approved or state approved facilities that you have to apply and qualify to be that you can use it. Maybe after that, you have to go through a course like getting a driver's license, the right to get it for your purposes. It's almost prescribed. And after it's prescribed, maybe you need to report it. There is going to be steps to it.
Yeah. I would love for it to be like a 10-year, 15-year process where it's only administered in clinics in a really rigorous way. And so that way we could sort of build a cultural standard around it, where I think that the whole marijuana thing was like, we call it medical, but let's be real. Like everybody sort of like, it was
very few people use it.
It was recreational.
And I would say the same is more or less true for even DMT or ayahuasca right now. It's like, even though people say that they're using it for healing purposes, at least the initial feeling is that they're going to have an experience socially more than, then later it might give you the benefits. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. On that note, so I think that's a lot of work to be done. Obviously, you guys have done a lot of work just in the sort of functional medicine space, the functional mushroom space.
Yeah.
Where would you bring people to if they wanted to learn more about sort of what you're up to?
I think foursigmatic.com is good, where we have a mushroom academy that gives more education that we're relaunching in 2020. Social media, our email letter, we put a lot of time on education and general awareness. Those are great places. So if you go to Four Sigmatic, FOURSIGMATIC on any social or our website. On top of that, I would say reach out to your local mycology association. They usually work almost nonprofit ways. So for very little cost, you can go on different forages and learn about the fungal kingdom, which is pretty beautiful. And then, I've done some podcasts like yours that have valuable information. So, podcast, mycology associations, and then Four Sigmatic.
And your book as well, I think is a really good resource.
Yeah, I've written a couple books you can find on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or something.
Yeah, thanks, Tero. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.